Samantha was in the kitchen, absorbed in the task of preparing her mother's favorite dinner. The repetitive motion of the knife against the cutting board provided a comforting rhythm, a distraction for her troubled mind. Her eyes burned from the tears shed earlier when Mason, her husband, launched yet another of his cruel criticisms. This time, he didn't settle for merely complaining about her appearance or weight. Mason made it a point to ridicule her, highlighting her flaws in response to any small attempt to please him. "Do you really think you can impress anyone with this cheap food?" His words still echoed in her head. For a moment, Samantha stopped cutting the vegetables and looked toward the dining room, where the table was meticulously set for that evening's dinner. All she wanted was a moment of peace, a family dinner that would, even if briefly, erase the pain of a marriage that had turned into an emotional prison. Mason, immersed in the financial problems that haunted him, was sitting in the next room, a closed expression on his face, lost in thought. He knew that Betty's visit meant something important to Samantha, but instead of finding relief in that family gathering, he only felt the weight of his frustrations grow. The business, which had once thrived, was on the brink of collapse, and the only solution he saw seemed to drift further away. He needed money, and fast, and for that, Samantha would have to cooperate. Betty arrived exactly on time, with a warm smile and a worried look upon seeing her daughter. She knew something was wrong. Samantha was not the vibrant woman she used to be. Her daughter's eyes, which once sparkled with joy, now always appeared dark, filled with a sadness she could not hide. "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" Betty asked, embracing Samantha affectionately. Samantha returned the hug, feeling a wave of relief, but also guilt. She wanted so much for her mother to believe that everything was fine, but it was hard to maintain the facade. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine. I'm just tired." They headed to the dining room where Mason was waiting for them. He stood up to greet Betty, forcing a smile. During the first few minutes of dinner, the conversations were superficial, centered around trivial matters. Betty tried to lighten the mood by sharing funny stories and reminiscing about good times. But soon, Mason's mood began to shift. His frustration with the financial problems bubbled to the surface, and he started to take out his anger on Samantha. "I can't understand how you don't see the gravity of the situation, Samantha. Do you think a little dinner is going to solve our problems?" Betty, surprised by his rudeness, tried to intervene. "Mason, this isn't the time for that. We came here to have a nice family moment." But Mason ignored her attempt to calm the situation. "She doesn't understand, Betty. She never understood. She lives in a fantasy world, thinking everything will magically resolve itself." Samantha lowered her head, feeling the weight of Mason's words. Each phrase was a stab at her self-esteem. She struggled to hold back tears, but her eyes were already welling up. She felt powerless, trapped in a cycle of verbal abuse that seemed unending. Betty, seeing her daughter's state, couldn't hold back any longer. "Mason, that's enough. I won't allow you to keep treating my daughter this way, not in front of me." Mason, inflamed, abruptly stood up from the table, knocking over his chair in the process. "You don't understand anything, Betty. She's useless, and it's her fault we're in this situation." Samantha finally broke down, tears streaming down her face as her shoulders trembled with sobs. It wasn't just the weight of Mason's words that was destroying her, but the realization that her mother was witnessing her humiliation. Betty stood up and went to Samantha, embracing her while casting a reproachful look at Mason. "Enough, Mason. It's over. Samantha, come with me. We're leaving this place." Samantha, still crying, nodded slightly, but something inside her snapped. The pain was replaced by a growing determination. She could no longer live like this. She could no longer allow Mason to slowly destroy her. Samantha spent the night wide awake, the tears drying on her face as her heart was filled with a mix of pain and determination. Mason's words still weighed heavily on her mind, like a burden she could no longer carry. Sitting on the edge of the bed, She stared into the void, her mind racing with what she needed to do. She had no more doubts. She needed to leave. The decision was made, and the letter she had begun writing would be the last memory Mason would have of her. With trembling hands, Samantha picked up a piece of paper and began to write. Every word was a silent scream of her soul, an attempt to break free from the invisible chains that Mason had placed around her. She wrote about how much she had tried, about how she had endured every difficulty, always believing that things would get better. But now, she knew that this was an illusion. "I can't live like this anymore," she wrote. "I need to find a way to rebuild myself, away from all of this. I hope that one day you understand, but I can't wait for that day by your side any longer." She folded the letter carefully, as if each crease carried a piece of her pain, and placed it on the kitchen table, where Mason would surely find it in the morning. She took one last look at the house, trying to imprint every detail in her mind, like a silent goodbye to the life she was leaving behind. She grabbed a small suitcase she had already packed and, with soft steps, left through the front door. The cold of the early morning enveloped her, but Samantha felt an unexpected warmth inside, as if the decision to leave was the first step toward reclaiming the light she had lost. She walked to the car parked at the entrance and drove away towards her mother's house. She didn't look back, knowing that any hesitation could be her ruin. As she drove, the city lights passed by like phantoms in her vision, but her mind was fixed on the future. She knew it would be difficult. She knew the wounds wouldn't heal quickly, but she also knew she was doing the right thing. Samantha needed to rediscover who she was, away from the shadows Mason had cast over her. When she arrived at Betty's house, she was met with a look of surprise, but also understanding. Her mother didn't ask questions, just enveloped her in a warm embrace, allowing Samantha to crumble in her arms. There, in that hug, she finally allowed herself to feel all the pain and relief of her decision. "You're safe now, my daughter," Betty whispered as she stroked Samantha's hair. And for the first time in a long time, Samantha believed that this was true. The next morning, Mason woke up early, as usual, and headed to the kitchen in search of coffee. Upon finding the letter on the table, he furrowed his brow in confusion. He opened the envelope and, as he read, his expression shifted from confusion to surprise and then to tense silence. He crumpled the paper forcefully, his mind spinning around the words he had just read. Samantha had left. That woman who had always been by his side was now gone. Mason felt a wave of panic, not so much for the loss of his wife, but for what it meant for his plans. He needed her to secure the loan that would save his company, and now, with Samantha out of reach, everything seemed to crumble. Desperate, he grabbed the phone and began calling banks, trying to find a solution, but it was in vain. Without Samantha's signature, all doors were closed. He felt the weight of the consequences of his actions falling upon him, but instead of remorse, all he felt was a sense of emptiness. His mind tried to find a way out, but the more he thought, the more he realized that the situation was beyond his control. On the other side of the city, Samantha was trying to find a new rhythm in her life. The first few weeks were tough, marked by doubts and uncertainties, but also by small moments of relief. She was free, but still carried the weight of the scars left by years of emotional suffering. Betty supported her unconditionally, but Samantha knew that the journey to rebuild her self-esteem would be long. Despite everything, there was a spark inside her, something that Mason had never managed to completely extinguish. Samantha began to resume her former career as an architect, diving into work as a way to rediscover who she was. Each project she accepted, each challenge she overcame, was a step toward her independence. Mason, on the other hand, watched his world crumble. Without Samantha to help, his financial problems worsened, and he began to isolate himself, seeking ways to escape the reality that was becoming increasingly unbearable. Weeks passed, and the divorce process was initiated. Samantha didn't look back, determined to move forward. And when the divorce was finally finalized, she felt as if a new door had opened. She was, in fact, free to start anew, this time with the certainty that she would never again allow anyone to put her in that position of vulnerability. Mason, for his part, faced the consequences of his actions with a growing sense of loneliness. He had lost everything, not just his wife, but also the company he valued so much. Sitting in an empty house, he finally understood that his choices had led him to that situation and that now he was alone, reflecting on the path that had brought him there. Samantha now walked through life with firmer steps, but that didn't mean the scars had disappeared. Each day she rose stronger, gradually rebuilding the woman she once was. But the journey was not easy. Resuming her career as an architect was like rediscovering an old love, something that made her feel alive again. However, the challenges of her new life were not just at work. There was an internal battle she still needed to win. Betty was always by Samantha's side, offering support and affection. The two shared long conversations at night where Samantha poured out her pains and victories. She talked about the projects she was starting to embrace, about how she felt returning to work on something she was passionate about, but also about the emptiness that still haunted her, especially when she thought about the future. "Mom, sometimes I wonder if I will really be able to leave all of this behind," Samantha confessed one of those nights. They were sitting on the porch, where the cool breeze seemed to soothe their restlessness. "I know I did the right thing by leaving, but why do I still feel so lost?" Betty looked at her with tenderness, understanding the depth of that feeling. "My daughter, you've been through so much. It's not easy to just turn the page and move on. But believe me, every step you take towards your own well-being is a victory. And remember, you're not alone in this journey." Samantha smiled, grateful for her mother's constant presence. She knew this would be a long battle, but she also knew she had already come a significant way. The first signs of recovery began to manifest. She smiled more, made plans for the future, and slowly allowed herself to dream again. In the midst of this healing process, Samantha received an unexpected proposal, a major architectural project that could solidify her professional comeback. Accepting the challenge would be a milestone in her new life, but it also meant confronting old fears and insecurities. She hesitated, but after talking with Betty, she found the courage she needed to move forward. "You should accept, Samantha. This will show you what you're capable of. And who knows, it could be the start of a new phase, where you leave all the shadows behind." With her mother's support, Samantha decided to accept the project. In the days that followed, she dedicated herself wholeheartedly to the work, pouring all her energy into every detail. It was as if architecture was helping her build not only buildings, but also a new version of herself, one that was stronger and more resilient. As Samantha flourished in her new life, Mason sank deeper into his own problems. Time passed, and the consequences of his actions became more evident. The company, which was once his pride, was now just a shadow of what it had been. Without Samantha's support, he found himself lost, unable to regain the control he valued so much. He tried to avoid thinking about the letter Samantha had left, but the truth was, those words haunted him. Each line seemed to echo in his mind, reminding him of what he had lost. Mason began to realize too late that he had underestimated Samantha's strength, and now he was alone, dealing with the consequences of his choices. One day, while rummaging through some old papers, he found a photograph of when he and Samantha were still happy, before everything fell apart. In the picture, they were at a picnic, smiling, with bright eyes full of hope. Mason held the photo for a long time, feeling a tightness in his chest. He realized he would never have that back. On the other side of the city, Samantha was moving on with her life. The work on the project demanded a lot from her, but it also filled her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She was once again in control, making important decisions and watching her ideas take shape. Each new achievement was a reaffirmation of her ability that she could not only survive but also thrive, even after everything she had been through. But amid this success, Samantha still dealt with moments of fragility. There were nights when memories of her old marriage came rushing back, bringing with them doubts and fears she thought she had overcome. In those moments, Betty was always nearby, reminding her of her strength and all the progress she had made. The divorce, at last, was finalized, and Samantha felt as if a new door had opened. She was free to move forward without any ties to the past, without Mason's shadow looming over her. And while she knew she still had much to work on within herself, Samantha also knew she was on the right path. Mason, on the other hand, saw his life completely crumble. Sitting in the empty living room of a house that once was full of life, he reflected on everything he had done and lost. The company, without Samantha's positive influence and support, went bankrupt. He was alone, with no one to blame but himself. Over time, Mason began to realize the error of his actions. Every bitter word he had spoken, every moment of coldness and disdain, all came back to haunt him. He was reaping what he had sown, and loneliness was his only companion. Meanwhile, Samantha, increasingly distant from that dark past, continued her journey of self-discovery and success. The pain still existed, but she carried it with dignity, transforming it into strength to move forward. She was ready to embrace the future, aware that although the scars would never completely disappear, they would not define who she was to become. Samantha looked out the window of her new office, where the plans for the newly completed project were spread across the desk. She smiled to herself, knowing that the path she had taken, filled with challenges, had made her stronger. And as she gazed at the city before her, she felt certain that, at last, she was ready for whatever the future would bring. Time passed, and Samantha's life continued to transform. Each new day was a small victory, a step closer to the full independence she so desired. Her career as an architect was taking off again, and she felt a renewed confidence as she saw her ideas taking shape in projects that challenged and inspired her. However, even with her professional achievements, there were moments of loneliness that would hit her without warning. Sometimes the pain of the past resurfaced, especially on quiet nights when the emptiness of the house was most evident. Samantha allowed herself to feel that pain, but she didn't let it consume her. It was part of her healing process, a reminder of all she had overcome and how far she had come. One day, while organizing her papers, Samantha found an old sketch of a project that had never been completed. It was a dream that she and Mason had shared at the beginning of their marriage, before everything fell apart. She looked at the drawing for a long time, feeling a mix of nostalgia and sadness. That sketch represented what could have been, but also what she knew would never be. She sighed, carefully folding the paper and putting it away in a drawer. "Some things are better left in the past," she murmured to herself, as if she needed to reaffirm that out loud. That same week, Samantha was surprised by an unexpected invitation. A renowned architect she had admired for years had noticed her recent work and invited her to partner on a large project. It was a unique opportunity, something she never imagined would happen so soon after her professional resurgence. Excited, she shared the news with Betty, who encouraged her to accept. "Samantha, this is recognition of your talent. You've worked so hard to get here, and now it's your time to shine." Samantha knew her mother was right. Accepting that partnership meant not only a significant advancement in her career, but also a confirmation that she was on the right path. With renewed determination, she threw herself into the new challenge, dedicating herself completely to the project. As Samantha flourished in her new life, Mason continued his downward spiral. What remained of his old life seemed to crumble more each day. The friends who once surrounded him had distanced themselves, and he found himself increasingly isolated. The choices he had made had led him to a point of no return, and now he was alone to deal with the consequences. One afternoon, Mason decided to take a walk around the city. He wandered through streets that were once familiar, but now felt strange and distant. Everything around him had changed, just as he had. With no particular destination in mind, he ended up stopping in front of Samantha's old architecture office. The lights were on, and he could see through the windows the reflection of a life he was no longer a part of. Mason felt a pang of regret. Memories of the happy days with Samantha came flooding back, but he knew those memories were just shadows of the past. He had lost the only person who truly cared about him, and the guilt for all of it was solely his. As he watched the movement inside the office, Samantha was on the other side of the city in a crucial meeting for the new project. The room was filled with architects and engineers, all eager to hear her ideas. Samantha, who once felt insecure, now spoke with confidence and clarity, guiding the team with her creative vision. After the meeting, while packing her materials, one of the senior architects on the team approached her. "Samantha, I want to congratulate you. Your leadership on this project has been inspiring. I'm sure the final result will be incredible." Samantha smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. "Thank you. This project means a lot to me. I want it to be perfect." As she left the office, she felt the cool night air envelop her face. She walked through the city streets, appreciating the silence and tranquility around her. She was at peace with herself, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Samantha knew there was still much to overcome, but she also knew she was stronger than ever. In that moment, she decided it was time to reconnect with other areas of her life. Work was important, but she wanted more than just professional success. She wanted to rebuild her personal relationships, rediscover the joy of living beyond work. In the following weeks, Samantha began to socialize more, accepting invitations from old and new friends for gatherings and events. She allowed herself to relax and enjoy the company of those around her, something that had once seemed impossible due to the weight she carried. Slowly, she felt her heart opening up again, ready for new experiences and perhaps even a new love in due time. As Samantha progressed on her journey of healing and rediscovery, Mason continued to deal with the consequences of his past. He knew that the path he had chosen had led him to solitude and regret, but at the same time, he couldn't find a way to change his trajectory. The irony of the situation did not escape him. Samantha, whom he had once deemed fragile and dependent, had become the strong and successful woman he never imagined she could be. And he, who thought he was invincible, was now alone, living off the memories of what he once was. Samantha, on the other hand, had finally found the balance she had been seeking. With her career flourishing and her personal life blossoming, she knew that the future still held challenges, but also many achievements. The path she had traveled thus far had prepared her for everything that lay ahead. And so, as night fell over the city, Samantha felt a profound sense of peace. She was ready to face whatever came her way, knowing she had the strength and resilience to overcome any obstacle. Her past no longer defined her. It was merely a chapter in a story she was just beginning to write. The days that followed her visit to Mason brought Samantha a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. The final confrontation with the past, that conversation she had dreaded, turned out to be the turning point she needed to free herself completely from the emotional shackles that bound her. Now, everything was clear. The pain, the regret, and even the resentment she once felt had been left behind. The project she was working on with the renowned architect continued to progress, and Samantha found herself more engaged than ever. Each meeting, each sketch, each detail of the work was an affirmation that she had found her true place in the world. She poured herself into her work with a renewed passion, knowing she was building something greater than just buildings. She was building a new life for herself. On a sunny afternoon, Samantha received a call that took her by surprise. It was an invitation to an architecture exhibition where her project would be featured. The news filled her with pride and, at the same time, an emotion she hadn't expected to feel. It was tangible proof that all her hard work was being recognized, not just by her colleagues, but by a much larger audience. On the day of the exhibition, Samantha dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that reflected the confident and successful woman she had become. Upon arriving at the venue, she was greeted with smiles and compliments from other architects and visitors. As she walked through the exhibition, observing the models and the praise her project received, she was overwhelmed by a wave of accomplishment. This was the pinnacle of everything she had fought to achieve. During the event, she locked eyes with a man who was watching her from a distance. He approached her with a gentle smile. "You must be Samantha, the architect behind this wonderful project. I've heard a lot about you." Samantha smiled back, surprised but also curious. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "My name is Lucas. I'm also an architect, and I'm really impressed with your work. I was curious to meet the mind behind something so innovative." The conversation between the two flowed easily. Lucas was charming, intelligent, and shared the same passion for architecture that Samantha did. As the evening progressed, they talked about their inspirations, challenges, and visions for the future. Samantha realized she was enjoying his company more than she had anticipated. Lucas was different from anyone she had met recently. There was a natural connection, a lightness that made her feel comfortable. When the exhibition came to an end, Lucas invited her to dinner. Samantha hesitated for a moment, not out of disinterest, but out of fear of taking such a big step in a new direction. But then, she remembered everything she had overcome, how she had rebuilt herself, and how she was capable of making decisions that were better for her. "I would love to," she replied, smiling. The evening was pleasant, and Samantha felt a simple, genuine happiness that she hadn't experienced in a long time. They talked about everything, from their careers to their personal stories, and Lucas never once asked invasive questions about Samantha's past. He was more interested in the woman in front of him, in the strength and light that she radiated. In the days that followed, Samantha and Lucas continued to meet, and gradually, a friendship was transforming into something more. Samantha, who once believed her heart would never open again, felt ready to let something new and good blossom in her life. Meanwhile, her work continued to thrive. She was invited to participate in new projects, each more challenging and rewarding than the last. Each victory, each recognition, was a reminder of her capability and how she had overcome all adversities. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Samantha encountered Betty, who was watching her with a proud smile. "My daughter, you've come such a beautiful way. I'm so happy for you." Samantha hugged her mother, feeling the warmth and unconditional support that had always been there. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. Your support was what kept me strong when I needed it the most." Betty looked at Samantha with affection. "I always knew you had that strength within you. You just needed a push to rediscover it. And now, look at you. You're living the life you've always deserved." Samantha nodded, emotional. She knew she was at a point in her life where she could look back and see how much she had grown, how much she had changed. But more than that, she knew the future was full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace each one. As she returned home that night, Samantha allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about everything she had been through, all the battles she had fought, both external and internal. And as she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not just the scars that the past had left, but the strong and resilient woman she had become. With a serene smile, Samantha turned off the lights and went to bed. She knew the future would still bring challenges, but she also knew she was more than ready to face them. Life, with all its twists and turns, had taught her the greatest lesson of all, that she was capable of anything, as long as she believed in herself. And with that certainty, Samantha fell asleep, knowing that no matter what tomorrow brought, she was ready to live each moment with all her heart. We hope you enjoyed this narrative. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more emotional stories that touch the soul. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think, and thank you for any feedback. See you in the next emotional video. Until then.